Good morning. My name is Miguel Moreno. I'm going to present to you my presentation today, converting your VCL database application to mobile and multi-platform. So the agenda for the presentation is as follows. I'll show you the structure of a VCL database application, the structure of a FMX or multi-platform database application in Delphi, then the database engine options that you have for desktop, multi-platforms, and also for mobile multi-platforms. And then we'll go hands-on with a conversion, live conversion of the VCL database application to show you the specific steps required to do. And finally, at the very end, we'll have some questions and answers. My name is Miguel Angel Moreno. I'm IoT designer, electronics engineer, and software developer. Longtime Embarcadero MVP. I started developing in C, C++, and assembler. Later started using Delphi. We all MVP and longtime Delphi developers. We know that you get the power of C with the speed of Visual Basic. That still holds true nowadays. So first, let me show you what is the structure of a VCL database application. We begin having a database engine, which is the core component of any database applications made in Delphi. Nowadays, you would be using FireDAC, which is the most modern and advanced database engine available in Delphi and C++ Builder. But if you have a legacy database application, database engine used in the past by Delphi like DB Express, BDE, or any of the third-party database engines, that's fine. They work as well, just as well as FireDAC. The database engine is the one providing the direct dataset-related components, such as tables, queries, memory tables, remote services, which vary by each specific database engine. But this is the core component that gives you the actual access to the database. Then you have the data source component, which in a VCL application is like the key point, the pivot component that links everything together. So once you have a database engine put together with FireDAC or any of their database engines, a data source is the one that actually connects and does all the magic for binding the datasets with the visual components in your forms, in your database grids, and for also other functionalities like binding master detail datasets. The relationship between a master table and a detail table is achieved using also data sources. So for the seasoned VCL database application developer, data sources are the key component to glue everything together. And finally, not less important, the data navigator. If you do have a visual data grid, most likely you have a data navigator, database navigator component, which makes it very easy for your end users to use the visual buttons to do the navigation over the database. Now, as a comparison, this is the structure of a multi-platform Firemonkey database application. The common thing is that you still use the same database engine components as the ones you were using in a VCL application. So in this case, you will be relying on FireDAC, DB Express, BDE, the same way you've been doing with a VCL application. At this point, if you have been organized enough to put everything together in a separate database module, it makes it much easier to convert your VCL application to Firemonkey, to multi-platform, because both frameworks, visually, they are quite different, but both support directly a database module, a data module. So if you have the luck or the tidiness of have everything put apart in a data module, that helps the migration drastically. You don't need to unbind the database components from your forms. Now, but the similarities sort of end there. This data source component is only used for those traditional functionalities to bind master detail tables together. Yes, they are still there, but they are used only, if you use them, they are only used for linking master detail datasets. They are no longer used for any binding on the actual forms or any of the visual components. We have now new components which are in the category of the live bindings. Live bindings components are the key components now to glue everything together. This is the key part where seasoned VCL database developers struggle. Live bindings requires a complete new paradigm of how you glue together things compared to a standard VCL application. So many seasoned VCL application developers have come to the point that they just give up because the paradigm is very, very different to what we are being used to do in a VCL application to glue the logic together. So that's exactly what I'm going to try to show you in this presentation is how to make it easier for you. Still, you will have to do some exercise on your own, but the idea is to get used to what it takes to make a successful conversion of a VCL database application to multi-platform with Firemonkey. So please keep in mind that this is one of the key parts that you will have to pay attention to as I do the conversion, because live bindings are definitely different from the normal way you glue together things with a data source. Finally, we also have data navigator component in a Firemonkey application, which is put together also using live bindings. Now, as I will show to you, a database navigator in a Firemonkey application makes sense basically if you are doing a desktop application. So namely, if you are doing an application, a multi-platform application that will run in Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, then it makes sense to keep the data navigator because you'll have the same functionality you have been doing with a VCL database application. So that component comes handy when you are dealing with desktop database applications. But when you go to mobile, this component really doesn't make much sense, and I'll show you why. Now, the database engine options, not talking about the branding now. I'm not talking about FireDAC or BDE or whatever. I'm talking the type of the database engine that you can use depends on what is the specific type of application you are trying to code. If your application is mainly on a desktop, to be run on a desktop, on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, then your choices are the traditional ones you've always had with VCL, are exactly the same choices. And you may not have thought about this, but I'm going to introduce these categories to you. First of all, you have access to any local database engine, like the old BDE, which was DBase and Paradox tables and datasets directly on your hard drive in your local computer. These type of engines are direct, meaning your program doesn't need to contact or do anything else. They have the direct access on your hard drive in your local computer. In this category, you have the BDE engine, you have the old style database engines that read directly from text file, those that also read from CSV file. There's a number of third-party database engines that are truly local. So you bind them and compile them together to your executable, and everything is accessed directly on your computer. Interbase has a local version, which for those that are using the professional version of Delphi, that you have this version of Interbase. So you are not talking to an Interbase server. The Interbase code, the process is linked together to your application. So the Interbase portion that runs the data crunching is actually inside your own application. You are compiling a local version of Interbase together with your main application. So that's the category of local database engines, those that the access is truly done locally in your computer. You don't need to do any remote communication at all. Another way to look at this is you don't need to access internet, or you don't need to have a network running for the local database engine to run, because everything is locally run on your hard drive. The second category is what we call thick database client applications. This is the traditional way you connect to corporate databases like Oracle, SQL Server, Sybase, Postgre, all those. What Delphi does is it requires some component that makes the bridging for the local thick database client. So still in FireDAC, you need to rely on this thick database engine. So for example, if you have an Oracle server in your department or in your personal office, and you need to install the Oracle thick client on your computer first, and then FireDAC will talk to the Oracle server through this local thick client database component. The distinction here is that you must have this local client installed in your computer so that FireDAC can then talk to this local thick client and then bridge through it and then connect to the local server. So FireDAC is not directly talking to these corporate type of SQL databases. FireDAC is only talking to the local thick client. This is a big difference because as long as you are on a desktop computer, nothing has changed. That's the way you traditionally have been connecting to SQL servers all the time through these thick database clients. And Delphi through FireDAC, or in the past through DB Express or any of the other third-party components, simply makes the connection through this thick database client. Now, there are some third-party database engines that bypass the thick database client. Somehow they make their own implementation of the necessary protocols and communication schema to talk directly to the Oracle database engine. Those are out there. Usually you pay a premium for those, because the big advantage of those components for Delphi is that you no longer need to have these thick database clients installed locally first. But anyhow, the thing is that since these are very resource intensive clients and pieces of software, so they work very fine and very good on a desktop application. And third, which is a more modern way of accessing a database engine, is with a REST client, or simply called web services. This is a modern way that most applications are being developed nowadays, mostly for the mobile applications, but desktop applications still rely a lot on the thick database clients. But you still see nowadays more and more, especially new applications being coded from scratch. They are being now, most of them being developed with a REST client. So the same technology can support both the desktop environment and also the mobile environment. In a REST client, you need a combination of a REST client that talks with web services, and then some kind of virtualization of the data that you are querying through the web service to convert it to a local database. This is the way that the REST RAT server introduced by Embarcadero works. They provide these web services so that you can do these new technologies much faster. Now, but when you go to a mobile application, when you're talking about mobile applications, your options are reduced drastically. You can only have local database engines that can directly store the database in your mobile device. So namely, your options get reduced drastically. Out of the box, Delphi will support only SQLite, interface, any of the flavors of interface to go, interface, the interface full, the versions that have access to a local storage. So those two versions, you have access to them in your mobile devices. You don't have access to the thick database traditional clients. Again, because those clients are very resource intensive, they require a lot of memory. They also require some local hard drive for caching and doing part of their job when talking to the to these big engines, to the big database servers. So except a very minor exceptions, you don't have available these sticky database clients in a mobile application. That is the key difference when you say, oh, I got this VCL database application, I want to move it to mobile with Delphi. But finally, you hit the wall at this point because your thick database client talking to the Oracle server or talking to the SQL server, this is your showstopper. At this point, you cannot do a direct migration of your VCL application to mobile. For those cases, when you do need to talk to a big corporate database server, SQL server, your only choice is to implement a REST client. And actually, that is the way that every modern mobile application does it when you need to talk to an external SQL server. So in conclusion, when you're going to mobile, you have to make a big decision of what is that you want to achieve. If the data that you want to use in your application is fairly small, it doesn't take much space, and only you are going to access it, like a wallet application or a personal data that only you use in your phone, then you can simply go with the local database engine option, and you can do a direct migration. But if you do need to contact to gather data from a remote SQL server, your only choice is going with a REST client for now. And that is a fairly more complicated process because it requires you to basically break your application into 3 components. You need to create a special application that does the communication to your SQL engine, then having a middle tier that will be creating the web services exposed through the internet or through a local network. RAT server is what fills the gap here. And finally, you need to implement the REST client in your mobile application, your mobile multi-platform application to get that data. In this presentation, I'm focusing on the local database engine for mobile, which is a direct translation from the VCL application. And on the desktop one, I will go with the first options, local and thick client database client. So REST client is a topic covered by many other presentations in DelphiCon. I'm going to focus on this, which will make a straightforward migration of your VCL database application. Sorry, I'm now going to start the I'm showing you here a traditional VCL application. The sample application that I'm showing you here is called My Things. I'm simply going to execute it so you see it. This sample application is being implemented with SQLite, one of the local database engines provided by Delphi out of the box. So as I said before, nowadays, modern databases that have the local access, you have interface to go, and also you have SQLite. And this is representing in a very simple way what you normally are used to do with a VCL database application. On the left-hand side, you have a master database that is being controlled by this data grid. So I have a category of things. And on the right-hand side, you have those things belonging to each one of the categories. Now, you have the traditional DB navigator here that allows you to navigate on either of the 2 databases. I'm going to stop the application so we can do this, revisit again, what is the structure of a VCL database application. You have the main form. And in this case, I did my due diligence of creating a separate data module. So let's revisit the data module. You have a connection. In this case, I'm using FireDAC. So this is the connection done to the SQLite server. You have all the parameters here to do the right connection. Then I have 2 queries extracting the data out of 2 tables. The first one is getting the categories. This is our master table. This is the query that will get all the data. So you can get here the sample of all the data that is being gathered for the categories. I have a second query that gives me the detail. This is traditional standard programming when you do master detail. the query will introduce a parameter which is dynamically bound together to the master one. And for those that are familiar with this kind of application, do the execution here. I have a sample value here for the category one. So at runtime, this data source, you can say this is the data source component. This is the one that actually links the master table with the detail table. So once you have done your due diligence of creating the parameter with the same name as the master table master field, then on the database side, you just need to define the master source. In this case, is the data source of the categories table. You define the master field, which is driving the linkage between the two tables. And then optionally, you can define some indexes. That will be for the sorting. Then once you activate this at runtime, categories will be controlling the query of the detail table. Here we have FireDAC drivers. In FireDAC, again, you need this component which is specific to each one of the database engines that you're using. So this component is the physical, is the code that binds the components in FireDAC to the thick client of your database. In this case, we are not talking to a remote SQL server. This is local. We are talking to SQLite. Yet we still need this component because what this does is link into your VCL program, link the actual code of SQLite. So that's what this component is doing by FireDAC. We're actually linking in all the SQLite local database code. Finally, you need to add in FireDAC these visual components for having the login dialogues and also having the wait cursors. So these are visual components that you need to add for FireDAC. Up to here, all this structure that you see here is totally reusable once you move to a multi-platform application. All logic that you see here stays working the same because let's say on the data side and the database engine side, all this logic and functionality does not change once you move to a Firemonkey application. The changes are here, will be introduced in the visual form. So here again, the data source is your key component. The data source here, you need to link, you are connecting it to each table. So I have a data source connected to the categories table here, another data source connected to the things detail database. And once I have these data sources here, I'll link the database grid. You connect it to this data source, to the categories. So the data grid on the left-hand side will show the categories. The data grid on the right-hand side has also its data source connected to the things one. The navigators are also connected to the data source, the other navigator to the data source. So again, in a VCL application, this is your standard structure. You rely on the data sources for everything. Let's start doing the conversion to a Firemonkey application. First, you need to create application. I'll go through the wizard here just to show you the steps, but I will not recreate all the steps. Just showing what you need to do is you create a multi-device application here. This will create. You have all these options. What I have found that helps a lot when you are doing this kind of master detail applications, start with this template, because this template will give you, once you create, I'll skip this part, but that wizard will give you a template. And I'll show you the application I had already created here. So this is the application after running the wizard and filling in. I've done a little bit ahead and added the visual components here. You'll see some key difference now is you don't have status bar. Normally in multi-platform applications, you don't have status bar. That seems to be something inherited only on Windows applications from the past, especially in Windows 32 applications. So modern applications usually don't have a status bar. That doesn't mean that you cannot implement it, but usually you will implement them in a more modern way with a special panel to show that kind of information, or something more dynamic or more with visual beauty. This is another thing that drives seasoned developers of VCL applications. Is Firemonkey has some of the components are the same, but others impose you to go with these new modern practices. I'll leave it up to you to see all the templates that Delphi provides you with. And also on Get It, you have a lot of templates of modern styles and applications. The sky is the limit here because there's actually no fixed rule of how you want to implement your app. So I would recommend that if you like one type of application, try to look for the templates provided by Delphi and then use that as your basis. What I'm going to show you is what you need to make it a database application. So I will not focus too much on the visuals, but actually on the gluing together, how you make that VCL old style application, make it Firemonkey multi-platform application. So let's go here to the database module. Again, I told you that the data module is totally reusable. So we have the same database connection to SQLite. You can test it here. We have our connection. We have the same tables, the query getting the categories here, the query getting the details out of each one of those categories here. We have the actual component that drives the links the SQL code into the program. So everything is the same. Please don't look at this temporarily. This is because the style book in Firemonkey, usually it comes handy to put it right here, but this is an option that you usually do, but usually this is not required. Would be just fine if you look at this for right now. Please bear with me. Now let's go back to the plane. That means that if you had a data module already, it's fairly simple. You just grab in, once you have created the basic template of the Firemonkey application, you just bring the data module in, which you can do on your project manager just by clicking here and then add. And then you simply add the data module directly. So that is straightforward if you already have a data module. It helps a lot. Now to the bindings. The first thing you will notice is that you need to drop this component called binding list. This is the new key, let's say, master broker that runs all the live bindings. Because once you have this component dropped in here, you run this wizard, new live binding component, and you have two options. Either run it directly when you know what kind of binding you need to do, or you run the wizard, which is the top option. And here, this is already being created, but when you create a new one, you go here. Live bindings wizard will create this wizard that will ask you, what is that you want to do? And again, this is the part that is mind-boggling for some of the VCL traditional developers, because you don't need to do all this in a VCL app. You just drop your data sources and that's it. But here, you need to be specific on what type of binding you are trying to do. So if you want to have a simple t-edit control linked to a specific database field, then you go with this option, link a control with a field. If what you want to do is have a data grid driven by a database, then you do this. You create a live binding that will connect a data grid with a data source. One more thing, Firemonkey does not have database specific grids. It uses the standard string grid. It's another part that drives some of the developers crazy. Yes, it's much more limited compared to the database grid we are used to. But again, keep in mind, the whole idea of Firemonkey is that you need to think in a new paradigm. The idea is try not to do the same thing you're doing in your VCL application as much as possible. Yet, there are many cases where you do want to keep it the way it was in your VCL app. So this is the way to go if you want to keep a traditional data grid. You need to create a live binding here, but you had to have created first. You need to drop into your application a string grid and then create the bindings here. And this would be the option. A string grid link with this option here will create the equivalent of a database grid in VCL. Now, this is different from what you can do in VCL. You can have a property of a component directly linked to a control. This is not exactly about database. This is about live bindings. So in Firemonkey, live bindings can connect all kinds of properties from all controls. I will not go into this one. This is mostly for having some interactive and clever changing of colors or shapes or reactions between components, but this is not directly related to a database. This one here, linking a component property with a field, is similar to the previous one, but this one does make a link to a field. So let's say that you link the color property of a box or a control, a visual control in your form. You can connect it with a database field as long as the database field values are valid colors. So you could do that kind of cleverness, have some components, their own property be driven by the value of the database field that you have. Again, here, the sky is the limit. It's simply you have this option here that you can change directly a property by linking it into a field. This is something you normally cannot do in VCL application, but Firemonkey allows you to do that. And finally, create a data source. You will say, hey, you said there was no available. Well, they do have it, but this is the Firemonkey version. It's not the standard data source that you have in Firemonkey. So please keep in mind, do not confuse them. The name might be the same, but this is not the normal data source. Here, I need to create a data source. They are already created here. So these are binding source, which, let me close this one here. So this binding source created by the live bindings wizard is not the same as the data source created here. They are different. So now this one here, this is something that helps a lot more once you do visual bindings. The visual editor makes a better job of explaining what's going on with all the bindings. To open it up, you just do this bind visually. Then you have the live bindings editor. And here you have a better visual view of what is going on here, because all the bindings are shown here in a graphic way. So we have the data source that connects the database from categories. Let me go back here. So you can see that it is connected to the dataset directly. So you connect this new data source after you run the wizard. It will give you this component that is connected directly to the dataset. So again, do not be confused with this. It's not the same data source that you have there. This is an internal data source from the live bindings. What you need to do if you run the wizard, it will ask you for the name of the data set that you want to connect. Namely, in this case, query categories. This is the raw data set. So once you create this data source with the live bindings wizard, it will fill this information from you. So the data set is connected to the data source. So it's similar in structure to what you get on a traditional data source. So I'll put you, this is a traditional data source. In terms that you do have a property called dataset that actually makes the connection to your table. So that's the point here in creating the data source. You connect finally to the raw tables. So we have the live bindings data source for the master table. We have the live bindings data source for the detail table. We have the master broker for all the live bindings here. I'll show again the visual one because all these fields that you want to show from the database are created using the wizard. So let me show you visually. It's easier to see this one, so you know what's going on. So again, we have the data source, the live bindings data source connecting to the categories data table. The asterisk here means the whole table. So this connection means that this list value is syncing to each record, to the whole record of the database, of the table. And specific fields like category, icon, are connected to this edit. They're calling list items, but think of them as a traditional edit component, only that in a Firemonkey component, in a Firemonkey application, these are a bit more complex. Everything is driven by list values and by list boxes rather than standalone edit components. So here you see the relationship created. The item text, this kind of text will be linked to the actual fields and will be shown by the live bindings visual guide. So this is what you get again. The data source is connected to the raw categories table. The individual components, this is a key edit. This is the one showing the, once I select this one, you can see the component being selected here on the top. This is the list box on the left-hand side that will show the categories. So let me do it up here. So yeah, so this list box will do text, and a bitmap will be shown here on this panel on the left side. Now, the detailed database that has the actual detailed data. Hold on one second, please. Sorry about that. Was about to run out of the power. All these specific components are here on the right-hand side. As I click on each one of them, they will be highlighted on the right-hand panel. So these are the bindings you need to create. When you run the wizard, it will allow you to create the link for each one of them. So this is, again, radically different from what you normally do on VCL. And the key thing is that instead of data grids, which you can still do if you drop a string grid and then connect it with a specific data grid component, but usually in these applications, you will see list boxes. Now, you may not understand what's going on. Let me run the application so you can see what you get. So once the application runs and dynamically the line bindings engines tie all the data sets to your components, this is the actual visuals that you get from the application. I'm sorry, right now I'm running it in the Macintosh computer. So this is running in a Mac OS. Since it's a multi-platform application, I left it running in Mac OS. So this is what you get. On the left-hand side, this side, you have the list box that is actually showing the combination of the category text plus the category icon. So that's what you get with those line bindings in combination that I just showed to you. On the right-hand side, you have the actual details, the detail table showing the text here, and then the detail of that one. So here is just the name of the thing. And on this right-hand panel, the one on the right hand, you have this graphic showing the index and then all this detail on the database, the author, serial, data acquired, condition, location, etc., etc. Now, you'll see that the total visual is very different from what we are doing on a VCL application. Now, on a desktop application, it might be a little overkill, but if you do this, it helps a lot because it's very easy to then convert this multi-platform application to mobile. First of all, since we're thinking in doing this like mobile, in mobile, you need to do much bigger buttons because when you have a phone or a tablet, you cannot have those tiny, very small navigator controls that we are used to in VCL. So in multi-platform, if you're thinking of having your application to be run ever in a mobile device, you need to think of having very big visual buttons that are easy to integrate. If I click on this button is for editing the record, then you can see that I can go and do the editing here. So I did an edit here. One other thing you will notice is that the screen is scrolling. It's similar to the old style of making wizards in a VCL application. Why? Well, if you're purely on a desktop application, this may look like a bit of overkill for you. But if you want to go to mobile, this makes sense because on mobile you cannot. There's no way. You need to swipe. So when swiping the screens, because the real estate on a mobile application is very small, then these buttons and the swiping make sense. So then you can show each one by portions. By portions, you show the data that your users can edit. And finally, you can see that all these components are very similar to the ones you have available in a VCL application. And all of them are coded with the live bindings visual designer. You just need to drop the component visually first, and then you link it with the database field with the live bindings visual designer. Here we click done, then that edit is done. So I just wanted to show you how it looks like. Again, here there is no rule. You may have noticed that a lot of mobile applications, each one has its own specific styling or visuals. So here I recommend, this is the suggestion I have, and this is the code that you will have available when you download it from my sample. But this is just a guide. Actually, go your own. Try to use try to copy an application that you like. Nowadays, I've seen so many applications, and like in example, those made by the banks, they have one style of doing the transactions, and 2-3 years later, because someone internally said we need to upgrade it and make it more beautiful, the application changes totally. So the way the interaction with the user is done and the screens, everything is changing drastically. So nowadays, there's no rule. Just follow your own instincts of what is the best strategy. Here, I'm trying to keep a little of the old style. In other words, keeping the master table on the left side to make it visually follow a range that on the left-hand side, you have the master table. On the center, you have the selection of the actual detail. And then on the right-hand side, you have the full detail of that component. This is running in Mac OS. You can see the desktop. So I'm already moved a VCL application to multi-platform. I'm gonna run this same one in Windows in my machine here. So I switched the platform. Now I'm on Windows. I'll run it again. So now this is the same application in Windows. So almost same visuals, but you can see that the actual components are adapted to the operating system. So in Mac OS, they have the Mac OS visuals and style. Here on Windows 11, you have the Windows 11 visual and style. And now the next step that I wanted to show to you is once you've done your work, this part is the most difficult one because creating these visuals takes a lot of time. Actually, to be honest, takes much more time than a traditional VCL application because now you need to focus a lot more on the visuals. Again, the focus on my presentation is not the visuals. The focus on my presentation is once you have your visuals is how you make it a database application. So I've been trying to focus on the live bindings components on that you need to drop all these visual components first, lay them out. Part of the trick, which is a little complex again, is making these list boxes have this nice combination of having the icons with the text. So for the actual, you can take my code as a sample, as a guide, so you can see how it's done. And if you have done this due diligence, you see that here, nowadays, the navigator, instead of having those tiny buttons that we're used to in a VCL application, this is the modern way to do it. Something that can be clicked with a finger. In case you move this application to mobile, then it's much easier for a finger to be clicked. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how just by cloning this application and with the minor changes, I was able to do the mobile version of this application. I'll quickly show it to you. So this is the group of applications. Let me switch to this one. Yeah, I'm already here. So once you have those visuals, that the left panel that I am using can be collapsed. This is something that is natural. Let me run them side by side so you can see the difference. So I'll switch to that application and I'll run it also as well. So this is the standard one. So this panel here is the exact same component that you see here. But Firemonkey that has that nice property where you can make this a fixed panel that stays there all the time, or if you can make it behave like a drawer, which is very common in mobile applications. So once you've done all this effort of moving everything to list boxes like this, and with the drawer controls, then it becomes very easy to have the two versions of your application, the one that can be run on a desktop and the one that you can run in a phone. So you can see just by clicking one property on the visual component, I converted it to a drawer. So I didn't have to drop a new component. It's the same one. I just toggled that property from being a fixed list box to being a drawer style box. And then you can see some of the strategies that I follow here is that by having this app intentionally made in 1/3, so 1/3 of the app on the left-hand side is the master one, 1/3 in the center is a selection of the detail, and the right-hand third of the real state of the screen is for the actual detail, is because then, having done that, then it becomes very easy here to, number one, the 1/3 on the left-hand side becomes the drawer component. The center third with the actual details being shown for that category is the main panel. And once you go to a detail, then you actually swipe to the right-hand drawer. And then you have the right-hand drawer being sliding in. Again, I didn't code a different component. It's the same ones you have here. It's only you change the behavior. And yes, you do need to do the change on the actions of these buttons. So here by double clicking, I made a slide. Here, I don't need to double click because the right-hand part is always there. Again, you can study my code to use it as a template and to see how it's done. But definitely, my key lesson to you is the hard part of the database part of a Firemonkey application is getting used to the live bindings. But by the same token, you also would have a hard time trying to get used to them, even for the visuals. So in other words, your learning process of using the live bindings works both for the visuals that you can see here and also for mastering how to make the bindings to the database component. So you have no choice. In order to have a beautiful, nice Firemonkey application that can be desktop or mobile, either or, you need to master the live bindings. Then you get the nice visuals, and also you can do all these connections of the database part of it. So with that in mind, This is the last part of my presentation. Sorry. Oops. Yeah. Then we go. Thank you very much. And we go now for questions and answers. Hello, Jim.
Hello, sorry, I had to start the next session. I'm here now, and I can ask you some of the questions. Let's see. Where can people download the link for your code?
Pardon me?
Where's the link to download your code?
Oh, yeah, I need to post it. Need to hand it over to you. So it will be posted along with the entry on the webinar page.
Okay, so we'll add it to the DelphiCon site so people can find it on DelphiCon.
Yes.
Can you download a DB file and open it as a database in SQLite on mobile?
That's a tricky question. The quick answer is yes, but not a standard database file. In SQLite, you can open some very basic text files, and then SQLite has some basic components that you, not some components, functions that you can use to actually parse the content inside. But SQLite is really SQLite. It doesn't have any capability of reading heavy structure, even the base files it cannot read. I mean, good old style DBB files, it cannot read.
So assuming it's compatible, then you should be able to get it.
Yeah. Now there's one thing that I wanted to show in another presentation, that because it's something that they haven't been asking me about this option. You can use the FireDAC SQL script component to recreate a database from scratch. In other words, if you want your application to do the basic structure of SQLite, the first time you install it in a phone or some of that, then the scripting engine of FireDAC becomes very handy. It comes handy to do like the initial load and the initial structure of the database.
Well, how about with Interbase? Could you use Interbase and download an Interbase database locally and then open it?
Yes, yes, you can. And the way to do that, good point. Let me show it because, yeah, that's a nice question. The mobile application that I'm showing here, you can actually run it. You can actually run it on an iPhone or Android, whatever. The only thing you need to do, which I've done here, is you go to the deployment manager. And yes, I think this part I missed, but I will answer it, explain it here. We'll answer this question. I hope I don't bore too much. The deployment manager, usually you don't bother with this in a VCL application unless you are deploying over a Windows machine that is remote. So in that case, yes, you do need to trick with it. But in a mobile application, on a multi-platform development application, the deployment manager becomes your best friend, because anything that needs to be deployed on the other machine, you control that here. So let me show you how. Here I'm selecting, I'm on my mobile application. Let me make sure that that's the one that's selected. So yeah, mobile, I'm selecting the mobile project. Then the deployment manager needs to be from that project. So here I have the deployment of my things mobile. I make sure that I'm selecting, here are all the the platforms I'm supporting here on this application. I select the iPhone as an example. This is filled for you automatically by Delphi, meaning all this is the standard job it needs to do. All these things is the icons of the application plus some libraries that need to be transferred. Namely, for example, in order to run SQLite, you don't see it here, but some SQLite libraries need to be transferred. So all this is done for you by Delphi. What I'm doing here manually is here, this. I'll do it manually again. Let me remove these lines. I'm going to remove them because this answers that question. This is the normal deployment manager. You click add a file. Then I go to this way where I have my application. This is the SQLite actual application. So in this case, if I want to deploy this application with all the data that I showed to you already in, then this is the way to go. You select that SQL file here. It gets added here, and you see it gets added for both the debug and the release versions. You leave this empty as is. What will happen is that the deployment manager, when compiling your application and deploying it to your mobile phone, it will include these files. Now, this is just half of the story. Adding this entry here, so then the deployment manager and the compiler will bundle your data, this file of the database, the SQLite database here. The other half is to a combination of using, let me show you here. At one point in time when you are starting your program, here is the main form. This is the key part. This part that I'm highlighting here, at runtime, I'm changing the value of the location of the database to this one, which is the application home path plus the actual name of the file, this name of the file here. How can this be done without having to run into trouble? Well, the magic here is done by a component called startup copy, which is part of the runtime library. The startup copy will actually check which files have been deployed, added by you, by the user. So on each platform, that startup code will put it in the user area of your mobile device, either the phone or the tablet. This code is responsible of dropping it exactly in the user area. So the only thing you need to do when you are starting your application is use this value, because that holds the actual place inside your mobile device, which changes depending whether it's Android, iPhone, or whatever. And you can rely on this name and then just add the name of your own file here. But you need to do this at runtime, so then your app will be able to find that database. So it's two tasks you need to do. One is define it on the deployment manager, and the second is do your own due diligence in your code to now point to the right file that has been deployed, so it can be found by the new program. Yes, and this is actually a feature not well documented, that many people don't know it very well, but this is the way to do and answer that question.
Will your sample app work in Rio or older versions of Delphi?
Yes, this app, there's nothing special. In other words, the components I use are standard Firemonkey components. Even this startup code has been there maybe since Delphi XE7. So yes, it should run in previous versions.
Yeah, you may need to make some changes because there'll be some files changed, but I think, but yeah, assuming most of it should work. Are there any good solutions for changing a VCL application to a Firemonkey application, like a wizard that converted or something?
There's that traditional one that was even bundled for free by Embarcadero. I think you're no longer shipping it, right? The Mida VCL converter.
Yeah, the MITA. I think that's. I'm not sure if it's being maintained anymore. Honestly, I haven't seen it in a while, so
Now,
it may still be on there.
my personal experience with it is it only works if you want an exact clone. But again, what I tried to show the attendants on this presentation is it's actually futile, meaning unless you really, really want just a bare bones clone of your VCL app, then yes, it works. But usually you don't want that, especially if you want to convert it to mobile, as I did here. Then you want to go all the way. You need to refactor your application and actually do the visuals and the styling. If you just want your VCL app to stay on desktop and you just want to make it available in a Mac computer or Linux, then yes, you can use that MITA converted and everything will look almost identical, only in Firemonkey. But that thing will not run once you go to mobile, mainly because of the explanation I did on the thick database clients. Those are, forget it, those are not available in a mobile application. So just on a desktop one, Mac OS or Linux, yes, you will be able to convert it directly.
Let's see. What statements like, I'm not sure I follow this. I've never heard of commands like insert in table, param by name, image, load from stream, mim. I'm not sure if you see the question here.
He's talking about the code that I show, how it is being run. Oh, yes. Yeah, something I also did here is I applied some tricks. Hold on, let me show you. Is in the edit form. This edit form, this part intentionally is done a little the traditional way, which means live bindings is running all the visuals on the main form, but this edit form, the one that makes the edition of your file, just want to show that you can still do like the traditional style where you manually do the transfer of the code. So instead of using a live bindings, here I'm manually controlling the edition. So when you do the edit, here I have full control of what you're doing. And the portion here is for the image. Because when doing the image, if you are on a desktop computer, then the actual image will come from a file when you click here. So it will prompt you to upload an image from your local computer, from your hard drive. The idea here is that if you're on a mobile version, then instead it will prompt you optionally to upload from your photo library inside your device. So that is the whole idea of keeping this more in control because of the nature of being this multi-platform with the possibility to be either fully desktop or fully mobile. But this part is intentionally done that way to keep manual control of this. So this specific form is not, it's using live bindings only for the initial show, but not for the actual transfer to the database.
Okay, I think, let's see, which is more portable for devices, SQLite or Interbase to go?
Portable in terms of seamless, SQLite. Powerful, definitely Interbase. And if you're ever gonna need to scale up, go with Interbase. SQLite starts crashing, not crashing, but struggling with performance very quickly. So for very, very personal projects like the one I'm showing here, your own very personal things that will not scale up, SQL is fine, SQLite is fine. But if you're like trying to do something that works right now with like the old style suitcase model that you transfer some big, small chunks of data to your mobile application, but eventually you wanna do it full middle tier and have some web services feeding, updating interface, definitely that's the way to go. In other words, if you want robust performance, I would recommend Interbase to go. If it's for totally personal projects that will not scale up, you can stay with SQLite or Interbase to go. Both are fine.
someone pointed out your battery's running low. Oh, good, you got the charger plugged in.
Yeah, had to run for that.
So the question about BiDi right to left, if you want to see that feature added, please go to Quality Portal and vote on the feature to be added. That's a big driver of when features get added. Miguel doesn't have any input on that, unfortunately. Yeah, someone's commenting that when you rewrite an application from VCL move to mobile, you need to, because the screen limitations are different. Says this is the easy part of the job. There are the strategies that make job complex, like these very easy in Windows, like dragging and dropping content. This type of strategies we need badly. So there's not really much of a dragging and dropping content idea on mobile, because usually you only have one application at a time. You can drag stuff around within your application. If you take a look at the interactive gestures, that's actually really powerful and really easy to use to do that sort of thing, to allow people to drag things around within your application. We have samples around that. Do you need an Apple developer's license for iPhone deployment?
Yes. Yes, that's very strict. It's a requirement by them. You need that even for they have three models. One model is, they call it developer, which means you connect it with a USB cable to your Mac computer. You need a certificate for that one, for that mode. And actually you create a specific one for developer mode, which is just tied into your computer. Another one is for developing into the App Store. It's a different one. You need to go to the website and create a different certificate for deploying to the App Store. And the third mode, that they call it ad hoc, that is used by corporations. When you transfer the application physically directly to other iPhones, it will only work with up to 100 devices, and you need to create another specific certificate. So even how you deploy the app, you need 3 different types of certificates. You can have just one, but depending on what you want to do, you may need to create all 3 certificates. And that's by Apple. There's no way around it.
Right. Which is the best DB that doesn't require the deployment of a server on the user's PC? I mean, SQLite and Interbase, well, you can do Interbase embedded. SQLite's very lightweight. That's why it's called SQLite. Doesn't require a database. There's some other embedded ones as well. I'm a big fan of DB-ISAM from Elevate DB, or Elevate. They have Elevate DB as well, another embedded database.
Yep.
There's a few embedded databases out there. For Windows, there's a lot more options. On mobile, you really just have the 2.
Yes, and that's why I didn't go to the other third party, because the idea is to give you solutions that work on all multi-platforms. If you want to go full multi-platform, the way I did in the presentation, you only have those 2 options. I mean, realistic, workable solutions that you will get support for. Even third-party options, there's no third-party option, because I've been getting asked for some developer groups about Firebase. I don't know why, but Firebase was up to date to Interbase, up to the recent new remote changes by Interbase. They haven't caught up with that, and definitely they don't have a Firebase to go or such kind of thing. So if you want to go multi-platform and mobile, you only have Interbase as an option. Firebase is off the question.
Yeah. For DevExpress developers, says, must they create their apps again? I mean, I guess DevExpress doesn't have Firemonkey components, so you'd have to, if you have DevExpress VCL application, you would have to create a Firemonkey application. But you could, yeah, I mean, you could put part of your business logic in a middle tier, but anyway.
No need, Jim. FireDAC has a binder for DBX. There's a component from FireDAC that binds to the DBX Express old style drivers.
Oh, okay, DBX Express, yeah, okay.
It's let me see what's the name of it, but yes, there is a FireDAC component specifically made for that, just for that. So you can use your old legacy drivers, then you bind them onto that FireDAC component. You just, as you might recall, DB Express was not made in Delphi. It was an externally DLL's drivers. So you need to keep that external DLL that does the actual linkage. So on the FireDAC component, you define the name of that DLL file, blah, blah, blah. It has some specific procedure, but yes, you get support from FireDAC.
I'm not sure if he's saying DB Express or Dev Express, actually, now that I look at the question.
Might be DB Express. Dev Express has not gone to Firemonkey. Well, they started with some visual component suite, but they claim that they didn't get response of the customers as much as they wanted, so they stopped development on that side. That's for the visuals. But DB Express, the database engine, yes, that is supported by FireDAC.
So a question here, do you have a proper way to connect live bindings at runtime? Okay, I guess to do, if you wanted to change your live bindings in code at runtime?
Oh, sure. You just do manual encode what is being done visually. My only take on what I did with the visual bindings is that it can be mind-blowing if you do it by code. So in line bindings, this is you go like the way you do things in Visio by Microsoft is that you better go with the designer because it gives you a better view visually of what you're doing. But yeah, definitely once you've done that and you know what's going on, all the linkage is done with the live bindings, then you just replicate those in your code or even change them dynamically, no problem. Actually, what you could do if you have two different behaviors of the line bindings, then visually create those two behaviors, the scenario number one, and then go again and create the scenario number two, and then just make your code go from one to another. You manually assign the properties. Actually, live bindings is directly assigning to the properties of the components. So it's a no-brainer once you know what you're doing. But I would recommend that you do those two scenarios visually, and once you have them coded, you see what the live bindings did, which properties were linked together, and then you just do that in code.
Okay. I think that's it for the questions. So there's FireDAC drivers for a number of other databases. You have to look at FireDAC, and there are third-party drivers that extend FireDAC as well. So it depends on what database you're trying to access.
I just found that components, Jim, namely it's called DBX driver link. So you drop that component in your data module, and then on the properties of that component, you specify the DLL with the former DB Express driver, and then you make it work. And there's another one also for ODBC. And that one, just like the old BDE, you need first to configure the driver in your ODBC manager in Windows. And once it's fully working, then you drop the FireDAC ODBC driver link and just make it point to the DSN, which is the data source name or ODBC convention. So it's very similar. So FireDAC is your support here for both things, for DB Express and for ODBC. And then the rest of what I showed in the presentation stays the same. You just need to add that extra step to link in the DB Express driver or the ODBC driver.
Okay, I think that's it for questions. I got to jump over to the other session now. So,
Yeah.
Okay, question here for FireDAC also covers Firebird. Yes. For beginners, what are the key areas to study related to database configurations? So there's a FireDAC, a bunch of FireDAC videos on our YouTube channel, and we did the FireDAC skill sprints that you can go check out. And there's a lot of good content there you can see about how to work with the databases. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. Otherwise, I do need to go after this question.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of questions that we would like to ask to answer. Yeah. But then again, your best bet nowadays is to really become a master in FireDAC, because that's your key database engine, regardless you are on VCL on Firemonkey. And if you do your due diligence of putting everything on a data module, then as I showed in the presentation, is seamless. At least the part of the database engine side is seamless. You don't need to change anything there. The visuals are the ones that you need to overhaul and redo.
Okay, I need to go. You're welcome to stay on and answer questions, but I need to go ahead and mute out and let you finish it up on your own, okay?
All right. Thank you, Jim.
Yep.
Yeah, I see the question here about the Dev Express. Yes, so we were talking Dev Express is not supporting FMX. Also, FireDAC about the microseconds, that's to ask to Embarcadero. FireDAC does cover Firebird. FireDAC bundles SQLite in, so you don't need to do anything special. Once you drop the FireDAC linker for SQLite, it will compile into your application. Even in the mobile version, it will also link in the SQLite. So you don't need to do anything else. Once you do that in your FireDAC, drop in the driver for SQLite, everything is being taken care of automatically by you. So the whole point of the local databases, like the ones that I showed to you in this presentation, Interbase and SQLite, is that you don't need anything else. Once you drop the FireDAC component for either of these two components, the SQLite to go, the Interbase to go, or SQLite, that's it. The actual code of the database engine gets compiled within your application. So there's no more deployment needed to do. Patrick tells us that Elevate database is for Windows only. Yes, this is not an option if you want to go multi-platform. Yeah, regarding the REST option that I showed to you, I knew beforehand that this would be quite extensive, just to show you and focus on the visuals that need to be redone for making this simple local database. But definitely, I would like to put together another presentation for you for going with the third option, which is moving a VCL application that connects to a thick database client and go through all the steps of converting, having all the tiers together, the breaking into three pieces, the portion that gathers your data, the portion that publishes it through web services, and finally consuming those web services in your mobile application with a REST client. Yeah, that is even more challenging in that it takes a lot more time, but that's the way to go if you want to have access from your mobile application to a thick client style of database server. That's the only way to go. And by the way, that's what you get. That's the kind of nice functionality you get if you implement RAT server. With the newest RAT Studio 11 Alexandria, now you have RAT server Lite, which is fairly much simpler to deploy than the full-blown version. So stay tuned. We might, I think there will be a DelphiCon presentation on that. That's one of the biggest new features in Rat Studio 11. You get a slightly faster way to go with to implement a thick client application in mobile. Yeah. Yeah, the code will be available. Bear with me. Didn't have time to upload it into the website, but within one day you will have the link there in the DelphiCon entry on the page. You will have the direct link to download the code. I recommend that's the best way to go through all the explanations and it. Again, sorry if it looks complicated. It is. Getting used to the live bindings coming from a VCL app is totally a new paradigm. It's a new style, and it takes some time to get used to it. The best way to open a second window, I think you're talking about opening new forms. The point with the multi-platform applications done in Firemonkey, one of the things that you learn quickly when you move a VCL application to multi-platform is forget about a show model. Show model, which is the standard way where you can show a form temporarily on the screen with full control until the user clicks OK or exit or whatever. That doesn't exist in a multi-platform application, and it's not the fault of FMX itself. It's not Firemonkey the guilty guy. It's because in operating systems like Android, they don't support it. Android does not have the features from the operating system to support a model application. So because of that, you need to get used to implement what they call semi-model apps. The way to do that is that you actually are hiding the forms on top or behind of each other, and then manually you make them to be on front of the other. So you are mimicking the show model, but in reality, you are not closing the form. You're just hiding it temporarily. So that's the style you need to do when you are in a Firemonkey application. It becomes tricky because then all your forms at one point in time are already in the screen. You are only controlling which one is the one that is being shown at the specific moment. Let me see, I think I have covered all the questions. Let me just go through it again. Yeah, again, you've been asking about the source code. It will be uploaded. Yeah. Yes, the Windows 11 that you see here is Windows 11 on ARM. This is an M1 Macintosh computer. So you could see that it runs flawlessly. It's running Windows 11 with Windows applications and the Mac OS applications at the same time. Actually, how to insert an image in a record or mobile. This application has the editing function. I didn't go too deep on that, but if you download the code and run it with the edit form, you can see how I implemented it. And intentionally, as I explained before, the edit portion is somehow manually done, so you can see what's going on, and also to control the source of the image, because the image in case of a mobile application can be downloaded from the internal photo gallery, and in case of a desktop computer, you are prompted to upload a file. So yes, there is an editing functionality on this application. That is done also intentionally so you can see a way, that's a way I made it to work in this specific case. Live bindings are thread safe. Well, live bindings is just like any other visual code. They're not thread safe in terms that whatever you're showing on the database on the top is the main thread that is showing your visuals. So this applies the same. When you do background processing of the database components in FireDAC, when you use the threading, usually those are not connected to a visual component. You do that processing in code by opening a thread, and then the master thread will wait until that sub thread is done processing, and then you will update something visually. So there's no difference here. It's the same strategy you would do in a VCL application for threading a database. It's the same thing you would do in Firemonkey. In other words, your visuals are always running in a top thread, be it Firemonkey or be it VCL. So if you do subthreading for the database components, you do that with the FireDAC components, but that FireDAC component that you are putting to work separately, you don't bind it. You just leave it working and then you monitor it when it's done doing something. But that applies both on VCL and also on Firemonkey. Okay, I'm done with all the questions. If there's no more questions, I think we're done for today. And thank you very much for listening to the presentation. And see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.